Alright, so we're going to try to get another tutorial in. Um, this time we're working on a mask versus mask match. Just like last time, I have already kind of worked it up. I'm just going to be sort of showing you guys how to do it. And we'll get into definitely some different stuff that we haven't covered before. Field access class or field access calls, multi-dimensional arrays, and how to use them in modding FirePro. We're going to get into just real basic attire swaps while the match is active. We'll get into temporarily changing a wrestler's moveset to meet a specific match need, or if you have another need for it. So yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to do. We're going to be working based on your First Blood project, the First Blood match. We're going to be working in the exact same project, so you can go ahead and open that one up. I've already got mine open here. And right off the bat, oh, sorry again. Right off the bat, you can see that in the First Blood match, I added a field access call. This begins to get hard to keep track of when you have a large mod like the mod suite. I did not realize that the sentence lose call in the referee class, the sentence lose method, is private. And so in order to use that in your project, you need to turn it public. To do that, you need to do a field access call. And to do a field access call, you just do this. And it's the brackets. I'll type it out here. It makes it easier. Brackets, and then field access class equals. And see, when you do class, it's going to want to auto correct it to the like the type class. You don't want that. You want a capital C class. And then you're going to type in referee, because that's the the name of the class that we want to access, and the name of the field that we want to access. And a field is basically anything that is contained in that class. All of the properties and methods are considered fields. And the one that we're trying to turn public is sentence lose. So we do that. And then you want to go ahead and add the group, which in this case is First Blood match. And that's all there is to it. If you ever run into a private field that you need to access, you can always set it public with a field access call. The one thing that you do need to remember about field access calls is that you will need to build and patch before you can use them in your code. So even if you're not finished yet, you'll have to build your project with the build button, copy it to the FirePro or to the manage directory, and patch the FirePro game before this will take effect, and you can use the private field in your code as a public field. So just keep that in mind, and you'll be okay. So what we're going to do today is work on a mask versus mask match, or mask versus hair, although the animation won't work quite as nicely for that. But basically the object of the match will be to remove your opponent's mask or hair. Again, the animation will look a little weird for that. So the first thing you're going to want to do is right click on the project name here. It'll have a little C# icon and say First Blood if you named it like I did. And then you're going to go to add, and in this list at the very bottom there's something called class. Click that and it will bring up a a list of new items. You want to make sure its class is selected. It should be by default, and you're going to call this mask versus mask, and then hit add. And it's going to add a brand new mask versus mask class to your project. And this is where we're going to do all of the mask versus mask codes. So The first thing that we're going to do here is the same as when we worked on the first blood match. We are going to decide, we have to figure out where this is going to make the most sense. And what I decided is that what I wanted to do, especially to show you guys a new thing, was to turn all pinfalls in a mask versus mask match into the grounded chinlock, so it looks like the guy is trying to pull off the mask. So that's the first thing we're going to want to do. And in order to do that, we need to access the create players method in the match main. If you remember, we used that when we set up the rules to in the first blood match, but here we're going to use it to change movesets for the wrestlers that are coming into the match. So let's get that started. We're going to go public static void, and let's call this add mask tear move. And we're going to need the instance of match main, so we'll do that, and then we're good. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to check there are 8 wrestlers in a match. So we're going to want to set up a loop to go through all 8 wrestlers. So for int I equals 0, because remember all arrays start at 0, I is less than 8, because they go 0 through 7, so as long as I is less than 8, you just keep going. And I++ means increase I by 1 every time. So that's what you need to do. You need to set up the loop, and we're going to work within the loop. So in order to work within the loop, what we're going to want to call is the match wrestler info. And this is what the create players method uses to build all of the player objects for the match. And since we're accessing them before they build the player objects, we are going to want to go ahead and grab the match wrestler infos and edit them directly, and that way it can go ahead and it will update their moveset. So we're going to go match wrestler info m equals, and they're all stored in the global work inst match setting, because sorry again, hiccup. All of the match settings, including the wrestlers that are going to be in the match, are contained in that match setting property in global work. So match, and we want to get wrestler I. And so there we go. Now we have a match wrestler info that we're working with. And so what we're going to want to do here is go, so the match wrestler info, in match settings, so it's going to contain 8 entries no matter what. But some of the entries will be unused. So we need to check and make sure that the entry is valid before we go ahead and do anything with it. And to do that, you need to check for 2 things. So we're going to go if m, which is the match wrestler info, dot entry. So that means if they are an entry, if there is a wrestler that has been selected there, and not m.isSecond, because we don't want to apply the moveset changes to wrestlers who are seconding. It just doesn't make any sense, since they don't really use their moveset anyway. So as long as they're entered in the match and they're not a second, we're going to go ahead and make the moveset changes to them. So to make the moveset changes, what we're going to need to do is come up with a way to preserve the original moves. And to do that, we are going to set a multi-dimensional array that's going to store the wrestler ID and then the 4 pinfall moves that the wrestler had previously. So to set up a multi-dimensional array, you need to go public static int, and then the brackets. And inside the brackets, you're just going to put a comma. And that comma means that there are going to be two values held within the array. So then we need to give the array a name. Let's call it original or orig moves equals, and this is where you'll define it. So new int brackets, and then we know we have 8 wrestlers and we have 4 moves. So after the equal sign, it should say new int bracket 8 comma 4 close brackets semicolon. And so that will set up a multi-dimensional array that you can write to based on the wrestler ID, and once it stores the wrestler ID, it will also store 4 moves for every used wrestler ID. So now that we have a way to store the original moves, let's go ahead and do that. So if the wrestler is valid and he's not a second, we're going to go ahead and write his original moves. And to do that, we need to write a 4-part loop. So for int j, because we're already using int I, you can't use the same variable name twice in a method for different things. So int j equals 0. J is less than 4 because we're using 0 through 3, and j++, increase j by 1 every time. So now we go orig moves, and then we have I, the number of the wrestler, and then j, the number that we're in, equals, and we're going to have to class this because the wrestler skills are stored in skill ID, and we don't want to store it in skill ID. That would require that would be a pain in the butt because the wrestler ID is an integer and then the skill ID is a skill ID. So we can change that to an integer really easily because it's an enum, and an enum is just a list that has a value and a name. So we can change it to an int just by putting int in parentheses before we say m.param.skillslot, and the skill slot is where all of the skill data is stored for the wrestlers. And then we got 56 because that's where the pins start. And since we want to do all 4 pins, we're going to add j to it. So it will start at 56 because the first j is 0, and then it'll go when j is 1, it'll be 57. When j is 2, it'll be 58. When j is 3, which is the last one, it'll be 59. And 56 through 59 includes all of the 4 pins for up, down, or for ground up, facing up at head, facing up at feet, facing down at head, facing down at feet. So it'll basically turn them all into the grounded chinlock, which isn't necessarily going to look amazing as far as graphically because they'll kind of warp to face up and warp to the head every time. But I figure for the purpose of this match, you can overlook it. You know, it's not game-breaking or horrendous. So then, after we do that, we're going to want to assign the move slot to the chinlock. So to do that, you go m.param.skillslot, which again is where all of the skill data is stored for the wrestler. So what moves they do, that's all going to be in there. And we also want 56 plus j. And then equals. And here we have to change an integer into a skill ID. Skill ID. So we know that the skill ID that we need is 933 because I looked it up beforehand. If you didn't have that and you had a move that you wanted it to replace, or that you wanted that to be, you would need to go into my move data editor and search for the move you want, and in the upper right hand corner of the move data editor there'll be a number. That number is the skill ID. So it's real handy if you're programming. That's why I added it in, actually. It doesn't do, like a regular user, any good at all, but it does me a lot of good. So I looked it up before I started programming. It's move 933. So we're going to change the integer 933 into a skill ID by putting skill ID in parentheses and before 933. and then we're going to assign it to the skill slot. So there we go. So now when the match loads up, every wrestler it'll check every wrestler to see if they're valid and if they're a second, and if they're not, it will go ahead and store their original pinfalls and set those pinfalls to the chinlock instead. So that's what we did there. And of course we need to write a hook. So let's go ahead and hook this up. So this is going to be hook. If you remember right, it's target class. Oh, we got to add our using statements. I forgot we haven't done that. So every time you make a new class, you need to add using. So using DG and using Unity Engine. And using Windows or System Windows Forms. And those are the three that you're going to need to, at least those three you will probably need to add every time. So just kind of keep those in mind. So now we can go target class equals match main target, I can't type today, target method equals create players, since that's what we want it to be. Injection location, we just want it at the bottom. The bottom is the best place to put this sort of thing, because it won't be overwritten later in the code. So we go int.maxValue injection direction equals before. When you're using max value, you always want before, because otherwise it'll stick it outside of the code and after a return statement, and you don't want that, because that makes it unreachable. And then we have int injects I cannot talk. Int inject flags will be, since we have the match main passed to us, we're going to do pass evoking instance. Inject flags equals pass invoking instance. And then the group is mask versus mask. So now we have that hooked in and we're good to go. So now that we know that we're using the chinlock to tear the mask off, we need to come up with a way to figure out if a wrestler is being put into a chinlock or not. And that's not too hard to do. So in order to do that, we need to access the apply damage section, because that makes the most sense. If they're in a chinlock and the chinlock is doing damage, it means that it hasn't been countered. So if we put it like, remember when we got the skill data from the animator last time? Well, that doesn't necessarily tell the game whether it's been countered or not, but apply damage does. If it's applying damage, then it hasn't been countered. So we're going to go ahead and use the apply damage method for this one when we hook it. So now we're going to do public static void, and we're going to go mask tear move. And apply damage has two parameters that we're going to want to pass to our method so that we can check the attack, so we know who the attacker and the defender is. And that is int atk underscore pl idx and int def pl underscore idx. So that's going to give us the attacking player index and the defending player index. And without those two things, we wouldn't be able to tell which was which, and that would not be good. So the first thing that we're going to want to do here is get the player objects for both of those. So in order to do that, remember, we call a player, we make a player variable. I'm going to call it atk player equals, and then remember the player manager is what you call every time you want a player object, and it's an instance class, so you got to call the instance of it. In this case, it's inst dot get PL obj, and then that method get PL obj requires a player index, so we're going to use ATK PL IDX, because we know that's the attacking player in the apply damage section, or in the apply damage method. So we're going to use it as the attacking player here. And then we need to do the same thing for the defending player, just using the other index. So player def player equals player man dot inst dot get PL obj def PL IDX. I feel like one of those is longer than the other, but it isn't. Okay, good. So that gets our players. Now, remember what I said about players? Anytime you use the get PL obj, you need to make sure that they're not null. Since we're going to use both of them, we're going to check for null in both of them right off the bat. So if, and you can use the not thing when you're checking for players. So if not ATK player or not DEF player, return. That way, if there is not an attacking player or there is not a defending player, it will exit the method. It won't do anything further. That way you do not get a null reference error and freeze the game. So now here is where we're going to check and see if they're using our wonderful the chinlock that we put in that's supposed to simulate tearing at the mask. So to do that, you go if ATK player dot animator. Remember we used the animator last time to get the skill ID? We don't really need the skill ID this time because we know exactly what skill slot it's in. And the animator also has a wonderful little tool or a field called skill slot ID. So that's what we're going to call this time. So if the skill slot ID equals skill slot enum, and then we got upper fall foot, or, and then I'm just going to copy this all the way up to the dot. So copy ATK player.animator.skill slot ID equals skill slot enum. And then you could paste it in every time. And then as soon as you hit that dot, it's going to bring up your context menu. And you could just select the next one, ufall head. Or, and then paste again, and put in the dot. And the next ones are going to be D. And it's going to be defall foot and defall head. Or, and then here comes the defall head. There we go. And then we put the brackets in to enclose our if statement. And so now we basically have, if the player is trying to use a pin, which is going to be replaced with the chinlock, so that covers the entirety of the chinlocking. And then I decided that I didn't want it to be instantaneous, obviously. Every time, the first time they did a chinlock, I didn't want them to take off the mask. So I included a mask damage array. So public static int, and you want the brackets because it's an array, and I called it mask dmg equals new int, and you don't need a comma this time, just the 8 is fine, just like when we were checking when we made the blood meter in the first blood match. And so what we're going to do here is, now that we have the mask damage, you're going to go mask dmg, and then we want the def PL IDX, so the defending player index. And then we have plus equals, because that will add to the current value. And then we need ATK, the attacking player. And we're going to call his animator again. Animator. Because now we used the current skill last time to get the current skill. Well, we can do that again. Current skill dot, we'll just check it. We'll damage it based on God, I can't talk. I am just stuttering all over the place. We will call it based on the hit points. So the damage it does to the wrestler's health, it will do to the mask. So there we go. And that's all we need for that one. But now we need to have a check to see if the mask damage exceeds a certain value, and if it does, then we need to change the costume so that the mask looks like it comes off, and then call the mask, or call the match. So in order to do that, you would go if mask dmg, and we need an index for that because it's an array, and we're going to go def pl idx again, is greater than or equal to 500. 500 is just a nice round number. It seems to make sense. And then we go now, since we know we're going to be changing the costume, we need to make sure that that costume is valid. And to make sure that that costume is valid, we have to know which costume we're checking. So we're gonna do int new costume index equals, and here we're gonna get the match wrestler info again. So global work dot inst dot match setting dot match wrestler info, and then we need the def player dot pl idx. You could have also used def underscore pl underscore idx again if you wanted to. I don't know why I didn't, just for the sake of continuity, but I used the defending player index. It's going to equal the same thing, so you're good either way. And then so these match wrestler infos, they have a costume number setting, so you're just going to want to check the costume number +1. And that's going to be the costume number that it gets set to when the match is over. And now you need to check and make sure that it doesn't, if they were using the 4th costume, it doesn't go above 4, because, or it doesn't go above, that costume, because there are no costumes above that. It will be an array out of bounds error, which will also freeze the game. So you need to go if new cos idx is greater than 3, because remember, arrays are 0 based, so the costumes, even though they say 1, 2, 3, 4 in the game, they're actually 0, 1, 2, 3 in code. So if it's greater than 3, new cos idx equals 0. We'll make it wrap around back to the 0 costume. And then, if once we've got the new costume index, we need to check and make sure that it's valid. So to check and see if it's valid, if save data.getInst, or you can just use inst, which I prefer to do actually, so I'm just going to do it that way. Inst.getEditWrestlerData, because we only know the wrestler's ID from his match wrestler info, so we need to use this get wrestler edit data. And then in here, there's a big old long thing you have to call global work .inst .match setting .match wrestler info, and then you can do def pl idx .wrestler ID. And all of that should be within the first set of parentheses. And then come out and do appearance data. So in between the two parentheses, it should say .appearance data, .costume data. I know this is a lot. And then you need brackets. And then you need the new cos index, which will call that particular costume index. And then all costumes have a slot called valid. So if basically that whole if statement says if the new costume index is not valid, and you needed all of that just to check that, then set the new costume index to 0 again, because you know that there is always a costume 0, because that's the first costume, and edit can't exist without the first costume. So there is always going to be a costume 0. So anytime you check and for not valid, like if the setting is not valid, then all you got to do is set it to 0 and it will be okay. So now that that's done, we can go ahead and start changing the player. So to do that, we're going to use the form renderer of the defending player. And the form renderer is a public class that's accessed by calling the player object's form ren. So we can go def player.formRen.destroy sprite. We need to get rid of the old sprite first. Otherwise, there'll be 2 of them on screen, even for a split second, which looks silly. You don't want that. And then def player.formRen.init texture. And then this has it has a lot of the parameters for this it's long, but it's going to be global work.inst.matchSetting.matchWrestlerInfo. Oh. Let's see. So, oh, I missed a spot already. Alright, so you can get rid of that. I screwed up. So it's going to be savedata.inst.getEditWrestler data. And then you need the parentheses. Parentheses, not that stuff. There we go. And then global work.inst.matchSetting.matchWrestlerInfo. And then you need def pl idx dot wrestler id once again. Then you come out here and you put in a dot and you go appearance data, and then it's going to be appearance data dot costume data, and then the brackets, and then new costs index. And I believe that that's all you need. It is indeed. And so then you put the semicolon at the end of that. And I think that I screwed up and left off a comma where I didn't need it. Or not a comma. Oh yeah, no, I do need it. Okay, God. This video is going to be a mess, I'm sorry. But yeah, you do need that one. I thought I added an extra one, but I did not. An extra parenthesis. So then after you have got the init texture, you need to go def player.formRen.init sprite. And you don't need to call anything for that except for false. God damn, I am not typing well today. And that false, it basically asks it if you want to load some kind of specular map on it, and you don't, because everywhere in the entire game it's false. It's never been true on a player, so just leave it false. I don't know why they included it even. And then you need to change the match wrestler info costume number to the new costume number so that everything matches. So now you go global work.inst.matchSetting.matchWrestlerInfo, and then once again it's PL underscore, or it is DEF underscore PL underscore IDX, and then dot costume number, and then you do new cost index. new cos IDX. So that sets it so that everything matches. And now that now that they've torn the mask off, because that's what that's going to do. Basically, what this does is, if the damage to the mask is over 500, it will change the defending wrestler to look like to the next costume up, which is, it's up to the player to make sure that it's the same costume but without a mask. You know, the mod can't do anything for people not setting wrestlers up correctly for this sort of thing. So that basically will switch it to that next costume up, and so it will remove the mask in theory as long as the wrestler's been set up for it properly. And then, since the mask is off, we want to call the match. So if you remember, you go global inst or global work.inst.victory or match setting .victory condition, and now we want it to equal a 3 count 3, and then we're going to need to change the name or what it says. We're going to need to change the finish text, so we're going to need another bool, just like for the first blood match. So we'll do a public static bool. We'll call it mask win equals false, just like last time. You don't need it true unless it needs to be set true, so you'll get rid of that. And so when we come down here after the count 3, we'll go mask win equals true. Then we'll call the referee. Remember, we need to set up a referee variable to call the referee into. We'll use mref again because that worked last time. And if you remember, just like the player manager, there's a referee man.inst.getRefereeObject. It doesn't need any parameters. So that's going to call our referee. And then you do the exact same thing you did last time. mref.pldir, the player direction, equals, and we're going to want to face him left. mref.request rec referee animation. And then we need basic skill enum dot referee stand match end front left. Then we need mref.state equals referee state enum dot declare victory. mref.match result equals match result enum ko. It's just easiest to use ko. That's why I use it for this sort of thing. So, and then mref.sentence lose, and then we need def pl idx. And since we used mref.sentence lose, we need to come back to our first blood match, find our field access call, copy it, and paste it right above where it says class mask versus mask. So it doesn't hurt to have multiple field access calls trying to access the same thing. It just means that if, let's say, a player decides to patch in your mask versus match mask, or match versus mask versus mask match, but not the first blood match, that the sentence lose field will still be public. So change first blood to mask versus mask, and you're all good. So now we have that done. So it does damage to the mask if it is the chinlock move, but not the regular chinlock move. That still acts like a regular submission. It's got to be one of the ones that we assign to the pinning position. And if it reaches 500, it takes the mask off and calls the match. So we've got that all nice and set up. So now we need to change the text again. So in order to change the text, we're going to do literally exactly the same thing as last time. You could even go back to your first blood match .cs, find the menu result, the set first blood finish text, highlight it all, copy, and paste. And you're going to do that a lot when you're modding stuff for new classes and things that do the same. You can set up, utility classes and all of that stuff, but I find it easier to do this. It may not be the most efficient way, but I'm not really super worried about efficient. I know that sounds bad, but yeah, it's not. It's for this sort of thing, it doesn't need to be retardedly efficient. It just needs to work. So it's easier to copy and paste. And then we go mask versus mask. In the hook group, you need to change it to mask versus mask. That way it stays in the right spot. And then when it says first blood, go ahead and change it to removed mask or something like that. So now that that's done, and we know that that's done, we need to write the hook for apply damage, which I forgot to do. So we can get that done real easily. So what we're going to want to do is hook target class equals match miss, like miscellaneous. And then we need to go target method equals apply damage, and the injection location, we're just going to do it at the very top, since everything will, it'll know everything it needs to know at the very top, so there's no reason not to do it there. And there is not a place where it returns out of the method, so you could theoretically also do this at the bottom. But there, like I said, it'll know everything it needs to know right from the get-go. So there's no reason not to. Equals before injection flags equals none. Or no, it does not equal none. We need to pass the parameters. That's right. And then we need group equals mask versus mask. Why is it freaking out about inject location? Oh, because it's injection location. I mistyped. And we don't need the second equals. There we go. Now we have a hook for your mask tear move method. And so we're pretty good all the way around. So the next thing we need to do is we need to reset the mask damage. Just like the blood meters, you need to reset the mask damage. So in order to do that, again, it's pretty much going to be the same exact hook. So we go public static void reset mask DMG. We don't need any parameters on this. We just need a loop. We need for int I equals 0. I is less than 8. And I plus plus. And we go, when we do that, we go mask damage in position I equals 0. And there you go. It just reset all of your mass damage for you. However, you remember that we also assigned temporary moves in the pinfall slots. This would be a wonderful place to replace them with something else. So we're going to do that here too. So inside this loop, we're going to want to make some space, and we're going to want to go. We're going to want to call the match wrestler info. So match wrestler info. We're going to call it M equals global work.inst.match setting .match wrestler info in slot I, just like before. And we're going to do the same exact thing here. If m.entry and end not m.isSecond, replace the moves. So in order to replace the moves, we need a loop of 4. So we're going to go for int j equals 0. J is less than 4. J plus plus. Now we're increasing the loop every time. We need to go m, we're calling the match wrestler info again, param.skillSlot, which, if you remember from earlier in the video, is where the wrestler's move data is stored. We know we need to start on the move slot 56 because I told you we did, and I'll show you how to get that in a second. Plus J, just like last time. And then we need to change this back into a skill ID, because remember we changed it into an int when we did it the first time. So we need skill ID, orig moves, I, J. So I, comma, J in the index of the original move array. So I, comma, J inside the brackets. So that will put the move back into the wrestler's moveset that was pulled out earlier and stored for temporary keeping, so that it wouldn't be totally overwritten by the chinlock. And then there's no reason not to clear this out. So orig moves I, comma, J equals 0. That way it just doesn't get I, comma, J outside the brackets equals 0. That way it just works out better. It's just cleared out. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's it. That's all you got to do to restore a wrestler's moves if you've changed them. It's a pretty easy process. It's you just got to remember to make that array a double. You got to give it 2 dimensions so that you can add 2 things or 2 indexes to it. That way it you can call 8 and 3 or whatever you've got to do. So wrestler ID and then move. So, but yeah, so that's that. And I think we have finished that up, so let's write the hook. And remember I said you could pretty much just copy the hook off of here, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to go back into your first blood match, find the reset blood meters, copy just the hook part, go back, paste it in, and then we're going to change the group from first blood match to mask versus mask. And honestly, cutting and pasting is just, if you've already written something for another mod, there is literally no reason not to reuse it, especially the hooks. It's just super easy to, I did this in this mod, and whatever I'm trying to do in the mod I'm working on now is essentially the same thing, or essentially needs to take place at the same part in the match or the same part in the code. There's no reason that you can't just copy the hook. And so that's what we did there, and set it all up. And now I believe that you should have a pretty much working first blood match. Or not first blood. Jesus, I am all over the place tonight. a working mask versus mask match. But I didn't want to end there. I wanted to give the players an option to select a mask versus match mask. A mask versus mask match. And I only want it to be applicable to singles matches. I don't want any eliminations. I don't want any. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a player count to each side, so a red and a blue player count, and we're going to add something to the match selection form so that we can go ahead and select it and deselect it, and we're going to make it, we're just going to make it so it doesn't apply to everything. So the next thing you should do is bring up match selection form, and you can go ahead and copy the first blood checkbox and paste it into the form and move it down below the first blood and change it to say mask versus mask, and make sure you can come down and make sure that it's public. It should be because you copied it, but always check just to be sure. That's all you're going to have to do here. You don't have to do anything else with that. Just add the checkbox and you're good to go. So what we're going to need to do here is add a check to make sure that that checkbox is checked. So when the mask tear moves, you're going to do if not match selection form. I can't type either. This has been a disaster. Match selection form dot instance dot checkbox 2 this time dot checked return. That's all you need, and you're going to copy this because we're going to paste it in quite a few more places. But that basically says if it's not checked, you don't need to bother with anything after this line of code. And that's what you want, because you don't want any of the mask versus match or mask versus mask match code running if the player doesn't want a mask versus mask match. You don't need it in the text replacing thing because you have the mask win thing there, and that can only be triggered if it runs the mask versus mask code. So you're good there, but you do want it in the reset mask damage method, and you do want it in the add mask tear move method. So there we go. That way it doesn't run any code, and you just want to put it at the very beginning, nothing before it. That way it checks that the very first thing, and if it's not checked off, so the user doesn't want to have a mask versus mask match, it just says, okay, fuck it, and gets rid of it. It just doesn't continue any other code. The second thing I said I wanted to do was set this up so that it is only applicable to single player matches. To do that, we need to add 2 more integer variables. So public static int, and no brackets on that int, it's just a single int, and then red team count equals 0, and public static int blue team count equals 0. So now we've got the team counts there. So the best place to count the teams is obviously going to be in the create players thing. So it's before the match officially starts, it's while the match is setting up. So what we're going to want to do is come down to the add mask tear move method, and the first thing that we're going to want to do is reset these, because it only needs to be checked in this method, so we can go ahead and reset them at the beginning of the method. So blue team count equals 0, and red team count equals 0. So now that we've reset them, we can go ahead and add to them. And I know that sounds silly because, we've already... Why did we set them to 0 if we're just going to change them? But they need to be 0 in order to give you an accurate reading of how many wrestlers are on each team. So to do that, we're going to use another loop, essentially. In here. So this is going to seem weird because we have this typed out right below it, but if m entry and m and not m dot is second. And so we're setting up another if thing to check. And if that's true, then we go ahead and we can increase the count, but we got to know which team to increase. So if I, so the integer that controls the loop is greater than 3, we're going to put them on the blue team. So blue team count plus plus, increase by 1. Else red team count plus plus. So that way it will 0 through 3 will increase the red team, and 4 through 7 will increase the blue team, and then we will have an accurate count of how many wrestlers are in the match. And this works even in battle royals where they're not technically on teams, because it's based on their position in the wrestler array. So it will work in all types of matches. I just separate them into teams to make it easier to understand what's going on, essentially. And then we need to check to see if there is more than 1 on each team, because we want it to be a singles match, remember? So if red team count is greater than 1, or blue team count is greater than 1, and what we're going to do is match selection form there, dot instance, dot checkbox2, dot checked equals false. We're going to turn the check off and then return. We don't want to run any move replacement code if the match is not going to end up being a mask versus mask match, because it failed the number of participants check. So basically this turns the match versus mask match off and returns so that the wrestlers do not have their moves replaced. And now what we're going to want to do is copy and paste this into several other forms, so that in case something weird happens, like they recheck the box in the middle of a match, it doesn't actually do anything. That way it can't be screwed up later by user error or whatever. So right underneath where we checked for the box being checked, we're going to add that check. So anywhere where you have not match selection form.instance box2 checked, that if loop where you return, you're going to add the team check, okay? So we're going to need to do that in the mask tear move method. We're going to need to do that in the mask reset, the mask damage reset method. And we already have it in the add mask tear move method, so we don't need to do anything with it there. So we'll just go ahead and leave that. And there is one more thing that we need to do in the add mask tear move method. When it's finished substituting all the moves, come down, create a little bit of space, and add global work.inst. Actually, you know what? Let's get a variable for this. Match setting m setting equals global work.inst.match setting. See, what we're going to use this for is to change all of the rules again, because we did that in the create players method last time. There's no reason to hook create players twice in the same class. You can. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just you don't really need to. Why don't you put all of the code that you need to hook into the same thing, unless it needs to be in a very specific place? That's the one caveat that you have to pay attention to. If you're writing code and the code that you want to inject needs to be in a very specific place in the method, then you have to write two methods that hook the same code. But in this case it doesn't, so you can just use the same method for everything. So mSetting dot victory condition equals victory condition enum only escape. And remember when we did that, we had to come up to this thing and make sure that we have the 3 count. We do have the 3 count there this time. I put it in preemptively, so we're good there. mSetting dot is foul count, because we don't want DQs, equals false. mSetting dot is ring out, or is outside count, or out of ring count, that's what it's called, equals false. We don't want that. mSetting dot what is the other one here? Is 10 count KO. That's it. Equals false. And now we're going to change one more for this one. It doesn't make sense to have a 2 out of 3 falls match with removing the mask. That just doesn't make any sense. So false again. So there we go. I think that's all we need to change rule-wise. I can't think of anything else. I mean, you could have a mask versus mask match in a barbed wire arena, in a cage. That stuff doesn't matter this time around. So, so yeah, I would avoid having it in a cage, because then they will be able to win by climbing out of the cage, and that is probably not what you want. So I would avoid doing this in a cage, because only escape is the only way to turn off other victory conditions in regular matches. So I use it a fair bit when I'm trying to do other match types. But then if you do those matches in a cage, it will come back and bite you in the ass. So yeah, I mean, that's just something to be aware of as a player and as a programmer, is that if the user does it in a cage, you might get a message that says, hey, when you play in a cage, they can win by climbing out of the cage. It's like, well, yeah, no shit. The only way to turn off pinfalls and submissions is to use only escape, and if you put a match in a cage, they can escape it. So, but yeah, so that's basically all we need to do there, and I think that's pretty much it for the mask versus mask match. You should be able to build this, and it should be able to be playable. There's one more thing that I want to show you, though, and you can add this to both this and your First Blood match if you want, and that's group descriptions. And those are those little things in the patcher that, tell you what it does and make the names look more tidy. So group description, and it goes above the class type, so you'll need it above the class mask versus match, or mask versus mask match. I just cannot say that. And so when you get group description, you're going to want group equals, and then whatever you've been calling the group. In this case, it's mask versus mask. And then you'll need another parameter called name, and this is how the patcher will display it in the list of features. So you want mask space versus mask, so that it looks all nice and it's not all run together and that sort of thing. And then the last parameter for group description is description, and we'll just say something like allows the user to have a mask versus mask match, period. And that's it. That's all you got to do. That will create a mask versus mask match. It will give the patcher a nice description. Like I said, you can add that to your First Blood match if you want to. But that's it for this, and I'm hoping to see some people's stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me on Discord, on the arena, on YouTube, wherever you happen to see me, on Steam. Doesn't matter where. Feel free to ask. I'll be happy to answer things. I know this video is a little bit of a clusterfuck. I think I'm kind of tired. I got up pretty early this morning, so but yeah, so that's it for me. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see some more stuff out of you guys soon. Alright.